Under the scorching afternoon sun, the Morgan family mansion echoed with shouting. Daniel Morgan stood at the top of the marble stairs, his voice booming so loud even the neighbors froze at their gates. "Take your things and get out, Grace," he barked. "You and those kids are nothing but dead weight." His mother, Eleanor, folded her arms, lips curling in disgust. "You heard my son. We don't need liabilities in this family. You've embarrassed us enough." Grace clutched her two children, Ava and Jacob, trembling, their small backpacks hanging off their shoulders. Her eyes, glassy but defiant, met Daniel's. "All I ever did was love you, help you build everything you have," she whispered. But Daniel's laughter cut through the silence like a blade. "Everything I have? You mean everything I built in spite of you? Go live like the poor woman you were before I saved you." Eleanor yanked open the heavy gate, tossing Grace's suitcase onto the street. The thud echoed like a verdict. The children began to cry. Grace straightened slowly, her face pale yet composed. She turned toward the sky as if asking it for a witness, then said quietly, "Someday you'll regret the way you threw us out," Daniel scoffed, slamming the gate shut. Dust rose around them as the family car rolled past, splashing mud on her dress. But behind those tear-stained eyes, something unbroken remained, a spark that even betrayal couldn't kill. That night, in a dim basement apartment miles away, Grace folded a small piece of paper, a lottery ticket she bought with her last dollar. She whispered, "Maybe tomorrow will be different." And tomorrow was different because 1 year after her husband and his family kicked her and her kids out, she won $200 million. But the real question is, what happens when the woman they called worthless becomes the richest one of them all? This is the story of how a husband and family kicked his wife and her kids out. 1 year later, she won $200 million. Hello, family. Welcome back. Before we begin, please click subscribe. Every single click helps us tell stories of courage and truth. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from. Because when we share these stories together, we remind each other that even in pain, we can rise. The Morgan mansion glittered beneath the afternoon sun, its white marble steps gleaming like ice, beautiful, cold, and merciless. Grace Morgan stood on those very steps, clutching a single suitcase and her two children, while her husband Daniel paced in front of her like a man possessed. "You've drained me, Grace," Daniel shouted, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "My company is collapsing, and you still want sympathy?" Grace's breath hitched. "Daniel, please, I sold my inheritance to help you pay your investors." "Enough!" His voice cracked like a whip. "You call that help? You cursed everything you touch." At the top of the stairs, Eleanor Morgan, Daniel's mother, stood with her arms folded, her diamond earrings flashing in the sunlight. "I told you from the start," she sneered. "A woman like her will only drag you down. Look at her, no class, no ambition. She's just a burden." Grace's daughter Ava clung to her leg, whispering through tears, "Mommy, let's go home." Grace knelt, brushing her daughter's hair gently. "We are home, baby." Eleanor's laughter sliced through her words. "Not anymore." She gestured toward the security guards. "Get them out, all of them." The guards hesitated. They'd known Grace for years, but Daniel's glare made them move. One reached for the suitcase. Grace grabbed it first, trembling. "You don't have to do this." "Daniel," the children. Daniel's face hardened. "I do have to do this. My investors want confidence, not pity. You're bad luck, Grace. I can't carry you anymore." For a moment, the world stilled. The wind died. Even the children stopped crying, as if the words themselves carried weight enough to crush air. Grace straightened slowly, her eyes filling but never breaking. "Bad luck?" she whispered. "When your company was nothing but debt, who stayed up at night sending proposals for you? Who made your meals when you worked through Christmas? Who stood by you when everyone else left?" Daniel's jaw twitched, but he didn't answer. Pride wouldn't let him. Eleanor's voice cut in sharply. "Enough of this drama." She had her chance. Let's not waste daylight on failure. The mansion door swung open. Standing there in Grace's silk robe was Chloe Burns, Daniel's secretary. Her hair was perfect, her smirk worse. "Should I bring the champagne, Daniel, or are we still entertaining?" Grace's stomach twisted. "You?" Daniel looked away. "Don't make this harder than it already is." A low, strangled laugh escaped Grace. You threw away 10 years of marriage for this? Chloe raised an eyebrow. For success, darling. Something you clearly don't understand. Grace's son, Jacob, started to cry. His tiny voice echoed, Daddy, please don't make Mommy cry. Daniel's eyes flickered just for a heartbeat, but Eleanor's hand on his shoulder steadied him back into cruelty. This is for the best, she murmured. The gate opened with a groan. Grace stepped backward, holding both children close. The sunlight hit her face, tears shining like glass, yet her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm. One day you'll remember this moment, Daniel, and you'll wish you'd never opened that gate, Daniel scoffed. You'll never be anything without me. Then, without looking back, he turned and slammed the door. The echo lingered like thunder in her chest. Grace stood motionless on the sidewalk as the mansion gates closed. Her children cried quietly beside her. Her suitcase, her dignity, her life, all of it now on the other side of that wall. And yet, as the afternoon light faded into gold, she looked down at her trembling hands and whispered, Maybe this is where it begins. Camera pans out the mansion shrinking behind her, her figure walking slowly into the sun. The wind carries a torn newspaper page past her feet. Headline, Lottery jackpot, hits $200, millions still no winner. Grace bends down, picks it up, and stares. Her lips tremble, not in fear this time, but in quiet defiance. The night swallowed the city whole. Neon lights blinked above the empty streets as Grace Morgan trudged forward, clutching her daughter's hand in one palm and her son's tiny backpack in the other. Her heels were broken. Her clothes, the same silk blouse Daniel once said made her look expensive, were now torn and muddy. Every few steps, Ava coughed, her voice weak. Mommy, are we going back home soon? Grace forced a smile she didn't feel. This is home for now, sweetheart. Anywhere we're together is home. Her voice cracked on the last word. They passed store windows glowing with warm light, families eating dinner, laughter spilling through open curtains. Each sound stabbed deeper than the cold. Jacob tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, my tummy's singing again. Grace crouched down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, I know, baby. Mommy will fix it soon. She opened her purse, 3 crumpled dollar bills, 1 hairpin, and a folded photo of her wedding day. She closed it quickly. The sound of her husband's laughter echoed in memory. A younger Grace danced barefoot in that same white blouse while Daniel watched, smiling. You and me, Grace, he'd said then. No matter what happens, we build together. She'd believed him. Now that same promise felt like a cruel joke written in dust. As rain began to fall, Grace spotted a dim sign, Clara's room's weekly rent, no questions asked. She hesitated at the door, but Clara Brown, a round woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a kind smile, appeared holding a towel. You look like you need a roof, honey. Come in. Grace blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. Clara stepped aside. You and those little angels can dry off. I'll figure out the rest later. Inside, the room was small, cracked walls, flickering light, one thin mattress, but it was safe. Ava and Jacob collapsed onto the bed, asleep before Grace could even tuck them in. Clara handed her a mug of warm tea. Bad day? Grace let out a shaky laugh. Bad year. The older woman nodded knowingly. Men, money, or family? Grace smiled weakly. All 3. Clara didn't press. She just patted Grace's shoulder and said, Rent's $40 a week, but tonight's on me. Later that night, Grace sat alone by the window, watching the rain trace crooked paths down the glass. She whispered to herself, I'll rebuild. Somehow. Her gaze drifted to a small corkboard near the door covered with neighborhood flyers. Between job postings and missing pet notes, one paper stood out bright orange, slightly torn. Hope lives here. Weekly lottery tickets sold at Ella's Diner. Someone had scribbled in pen beneath it, Dreams only cost $1. Grace stared at it for a long moment. The words hit deeper than they should have. Hope lives here, she murmured. She didn't believe in luck anymore, but something in those words tugged at her like a whisper she couldn't ignore. Sunlight filtered through the dirty curtains. Grace woke to the sound of her kids giggling. For the first time in days, they smiled. Jacob pointed at a dusty plant by the window. Look, Mommy, it's trying to grow. Grace smiled faintly. So are we. She looked at the clock, already 7:40. She'd promised Clara she'd find work. She grabbed her bag and kissed both children. I'll be back before the sun goes down. As she opened the door to leave, she paused, eyes lingering again on that orange flyer. She took it down quietly, folded it, and slipped it into her purse. Outside, she passed a newspaper stand. The headline read, "Local business mogul expands empire. Daniel Morgan partners with Burns Enterprises." Grace froze, her hand tightening around the orange flyer in her bag. Her expression hardened pain, fading into something colder, sharper. Narrator's voice softens. Sometimes, rock bottom isn't the end. It's the floor beneath a door no one ever thought you'd open. The Morgan mansion had never looked brighter. Golden lights spilled across the grand dining hall, catching every crystal and diamond like a promise of perfection. But beneath the glow, it reeked of something uglier, arrogance disguised as victory. Chloe Burns, now Mrs. Morgan in everything but name, glided down the marble staircase, wearing one of Grace's old silk robes, the one Daniel once said made his wife look like a goddess. Now, it hugged Chloe's frame as she smiled into her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Fits perfectly," she whispered, smirking. "Guess some things were just meant for me." Downstairs, Eleanor Morgan supervised a line of servers setting champagne glasses. "Everything must be flawless," she snapped. "Tonight we toast to a new beginning." Daniel, in a crisp navy suit, stood by the fireplace, rehearsing his charm. "Our investors will be here any minute," he said. "We need them to see that I've moved on stronger, sharper, richer." Eleanor smiled proudly. "You made the right choice, son. That woman was a stain on this family name." The word "that woman," Grace hung in the air, but no one dared to speak it aloud. Cameras flash. Laughter fills the room. The Morgans are back in the papers. The perfect picture of luxury reborn. Chloe clinks her glass. "To second chances," she purrs. Daniel raises his. "To winning again." Their glasses meet with a soft chime, hollow and cruel. In the background, one of the maids sets a box on the counter, the last of Grace's belongings that had been found in the attic. Inside, a few photo frames, a broken necklace, and a small jewelry box tied with a faded blue ribbon. Chloe's curiosity flickers. She waits until the guests drift toward the terrace, then quietly opens the box. Inside lies a letter, sealed with wax. The handwriting elegant, neat, and unmistakably old-fashioned. To Grace Morgan, confidential. Chloe frowns. Confidential? She unfolds it just enough to see the letterhead, Whitmore and Associates, Legal Affairs. A flash of unease crosses her eyes. Before she can read more, Eleanor walks in. "Chloe, what are you doing?" Chloe startles, then laughs lightly. "Just cleaning up Grace's leftovers." Eleanor eyes the paper suspiciously. "Nothing in that box matters anymore. Burn it." Chloe hesitates. Eleanor's tone sharpens. "I said burn it." Chloe forces a smile. "Of course." In the garden, Daniel's laughter echoes as guests toast to his resilience. But under the soft glow of the lanterns, his eyes aren't celebrating, they're haunted. A waiter whispers to another. He doesn't even look happy. Because deep down, Daniel knows the truth. He doesn't miss Grace's face. He misses her steadiness, her quiet wisdom, her ability to calm storms. Chloe gives him thrill, not peace. Still, pride is louder than conscience. He turns to Chloe and whispers, "Tonight marks the real beginning." Chloe leans close, her perfume sharp. "Then let's make sure she never comes back to ruin it." The mansion empties. Music fades. Chloe steps outside with a matchbox. She holds the sealed letter over a bronze bowl and watches it burn slow, deliberate. But for a moment, just before the flame consumes it, her eyes catch a few words in the smoke's glow. "Upon reaching the age of 32, all remaining assets from the Harper estate shall pass directly to Grace Morgan." Her heartbeat spikes. "What?" The flame licks higher, erasing the rest. She tosses the ashes into the night wind, shaken. Daniel's voice calls from inside. "Chloe, come to bed." She takes one last look at the glowing ashes, whispering to herself, "If that's real, she'll never find out." She steps back into the light, smile perfect again. The wind carries the last ember of the burned letter over the wall, drifting into the street below, landing just a few feet from a woman walking past with 2 children and a folded orange flyer in her hand. They burned what could have saved her, not knowing that destiny was already circling back, wearing the quiet face of hope. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to do it now. Every click, every share, every comment helps us keep telling stories that give strength to women and children who've been broken, forgotten, or silenced. When you subscribe, you're not just supporting a channel, you're standing beside survivors, saying their stories matter. Turn on your notification bell so you never miss a story that could change a life. And in the comments, tell us where are you watching from and what part of this story spoke to your heart. The next morning crept in slowly, gray light slipping through the thin curtains of the tiny basement room. Grace Morgan sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. They were calloused now, the hands of a woman who scrubbed floors, not signed contracts. She had started working at a nearby diner 2 weeks earlier. The pay barely covered food, but it kept her children fed, and that was enough for now. From the kitchenette came soft giggles. Ava and Jacob sat on the floor, stacking old soup cans like building blocks. Jacob looked up, beaming. "Mommy, look, it's a castle." Grace smiled faintly. "It's perfect, baby. Just like you." But when she turned away, her face fell again. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed exhaustion, dark circles, hollow cheeks, eyes that had seen too much for 32 years. She tied her hair, whispered a small prayer, and grabbed her bag for work. Just as she opened the door, Clara Brown, her landlady, appeared holding a letter. "Mail for you, sweetheart," Clara said. "Came early this morning." Grace frowned. "For me? Who even knows where I live?" The envelope was old cream-colored, sealed with a wax emblem that looked faintly like a crest. The sender read, "Whitmore and Associates Legal Affairs." Grace's heart skipped. She tore it open. Inside was a short, neatly folded note. "Dear Mrs. Morgan, I was your late father's attorney and close friend. There are matters regarding his estate that require your immediate attention. Please visit my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Yours sincerely, Mr. Leonard Whitmore." Grace's fingers trembled. Her father, she hadn't heard that name in years. A young Grace sitting in her father's study, watching him scribble numbers in a small black notebook. He used to say, "You'll understand these numbers one day, Grace. They're not about luck, they're about legacy." Her chest tightened at the memory. She had been 20 when he died. They'd said his business went bankrupt. But what if? Grace tucked the letter into her purse, her heartbeat quickening. For the first time in months, she felt something flicker beneath the weight of despair, hope. At the diner that day, she couldn't focus. Every clatter of plates made her glance at the clock. She imagined her father's face, the way he used to smile and say, "You've got my fire, Grace. Never let them put it out." That night, she confided in Maya Carter, her best friend and co-worker. Maya, wiping the counter, looked skeptical. "A lawyer from your dad? After all these years?" "I know it sounds strange," Grace said, "but I can't ignore it. Maybe it's something." Maya smiled faintly. "Honey, you've earned a miracle or two." Then, jokingly, she added, "Maybe it's a treasure map." Grace laughed, a sound she hadn't made in months. "If it is, I hope it leads somewhere warm." That night, Grace tucked her children into bed. The little basement room felt less like a cell and more like a shelter, now a pause between storms. She sat by the window, holding the letter under the moonlight. "If you really left something, Dad, please let it be enough to start over." The camera lingers on her face, a mix of fear, exhaustion, and fragile courage. Then a soft sound interrupts the quiet, a thud outside the door. Grace stands, heart racing. She opens it cautiously. No one is there, just a folded piece of paper slipped under the mat. Her breath catches as she unfolds it. "Be careful who you trust. Not everything your father owned was lost." No signature, no address. Just those words, neat, precise, deliberate. Grace looks out into the empty street, scanning the shadows. The orange "Hope Lives Here" flyer flutters on the wall behind her, illuminated by a single streetlight. While her enemies celebrated her fall, someone else had already started lighting her path back up. Fade to black. The next morning felt different. The same sun that once mocked Grace Morgan's misery now painted her in gold. Her hands trembled as she buttoned her blouse, the nicest one she owned, and tucked the mysterious letter from Mr. Whitmore into her purse. Ava stirred under the blanket. "Mommy, are you going to work?" Grace knelt beside her daughter and kissed her forehead. "Not today, baby. Mommy has something important to do." Jacob, still half asleep, mumbled, "Will you bring pancakes?" Grace smiled. If everything goes well, I'll bring a whole stack. The camera lingers on her children. Two small reasons she refused to give up before cutting to the bus ride across the city. Outside, the world blurred past the window. Suits rushing, horns blaring, people living lives she used to have. Grace clutched the letter tighter. What could my father have possibly left after all these years? The law office stood at the corner of Main Street, an old brick building with ivy crawling up its walls. Inside, the scent of paper and polished wood filled the air. Behind a mahogany desk sat Mr. Leonard Whitmore, silver-haired and warm-eyed, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Morgan," he greeted, standing to shake her hand. "You look so much like your father did the day he signed the Harper Trust." Grace froze. "The what?" He motioned for her to sit. "You were very young then. Your father, Thomas Harper, left behind partial ownership in a mining company. The shares were held in escrow until you turned 32, your current age." Grace blinked. "That can't be right. We were broke when he died. The house, the business, everything was gone." Whitmore nodded. "That's what everyone thought. But your father had a private investment, 10% equity in Redwood Mining. The company was sold last year for $15 million. Your portion, after taxes and legal fees, comes to about $1.5 million. Her breath caught. The words didn't even sound real. "Are you saying I have money?" He smiled. "More than that, Mrs. Morgan, you have security. You'll need to sign a few documents to release the funds. It will take a few weeks to process." Grace pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "I don't even know what to say." "Your father knew you'd find your way here when the time was right," Whitmore said softly. "He told me once, my daughter doesn't need saving. She needs time to remember she's a Harper." Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she whispered, "He always believed in me, even when I didn't." A soft flashback flickers a 10-year-old Grace in her father's office, sitting on his lap as he showed her blueprints and said, "One day, you'll build something bigger than I ever could." Back in the present, Grace laughs through her tears. "Maybe he was right." Mr. Whitmore handed her a small envelope. "He also left this for you, said to open it only when you feel you've lost everything." Grace stared at it, her breath uneven. "Then I guess this is that time." As she stood to leave, Whitmore's assistant turned on the office TV. A headline scrolled across the bottom: "Lottery jackpot rises to $200 million record, drawing this weekend." Whitmore chuckled lightly. "Seems luck is in the air these days." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe it's something more than luck." She stepped outside, wind lifting her hair as sunlight hit her face. For the first time in a long while, the world didn't look cruel, it looked possible. She opened her purse, pulling out the orange "Hope Lives Here" flyer she'd taken from Clara's board. She folded it next to the sealed envelope from her father, two symbols of destiny crossing paths. As she walks away, the camera pans up to reveal a black sedan parked across the street. Inside, Chloe Burns lowers her sunglasses, watching Grace with a calculating stare. She whispers into her phone, "Daniel, you're not going to believe who's still standing." She thought she'd found closure, but the truth waiting inside that sealed envelope would set fire to everything again, including the lives of those who burned her. The Morgan mansion glimmered again, laughter, clinking glasses, and the sound of success echoing through the same halls where Grace Morgan once cried. Gold chandeliers shimmered above a crowd of executives, influencers, and gossip-hungry socialites. Tonight wasn't just a party, it was Daniel Morgan's grand comeback. He stood at the center of it all, tuxedo sharp, glass in hand, smile practiced. "To new beginnings," he toasted. "To rebuilding stronger with family by my side." Applause erupted. Eleanor Morgan beamed proudly beside him, her diamond necklace catching the light. "And to Chloe," Daniel added, wrapping his arm around his secretary-turned-mistress, "for believing in me when no one else did." Chloe's laugh was honeyed and dangerous. "Oh, Daniel, you make it sound like a fairy tale." Across the hall, photographers snapped photos. Daniel Morgan, the man who rose from ruin. No one mentioned how he fell. No one whispered the name Grace. As the guests mingled, Eleanor leaned toward Chloe. "He looks happier, don't you think?" Chloe swirled her champagne. "He looks relieved. But happiness? That's expensive." Eleanor chuckled, mistaking venom for charm. "A woman like you will never have to worry about that." But Chloe's eyes flicked toward Daniel, the man she'd fought to win, and saw something that unsettled her. Emptiness. Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. Even surrounded by luxury, his gaze wandered to the grand staircase, the one Grace had once descended, children in tow, begging him to listen. He turned sharply, almost shaking off the thought. "Refill?" he said to no one in particular. At that same moment, Grace, across town, sat on the edge of a diner stool, her uniform still damp from dishwater. The TV above the counter flickered with news coverage of Daniel's event. Reporter: "After last year's scandal nearly sank his company, Daniel Morgan has made a stunning recovery with his new partner, Chloe Burns." Grace froze. There he was, laughing, glowing, untouchable. And next to him, Chloe, in the same diamond earrings Grace once wore to his first business gala. Maya Carter, her friend and co-worker, turned to look. "Is that?" Grace nodded, her jaw tight. "That's him," the news anchor continued. "While former spouse Grace Morgan has not been seen publicly since their divorce, sources say she's been living quietly with her 2 children. Grace exhaled shakily. "Quietly? They make it sound like I died." Maya rested a hand on hers. "He thinks the story's over, Grace. Prove him wrong." Grace forced a smile. "Oh, I intend to." Her gaze drifted upward, the same screen, now flashing a lottery commercial. Saturday's jackpot, $200 million. One ticket could change everything. She stared at it longer than she meant to, a spark faint but real lit behind her eyes. Daniel clinked glasses again. To success, to loyalty, and to the future. As the guests cheered, a small hush fell near the fireplace. One of Daniel's old business rivals, Ethan Cole, approached with a smirk. "Quite the turnaround, Morgan," he said smoothly. "Last I heard, your wife was the one holding your books together." Daniel's smile stiffened. "Ex-wife. And she was holding me back, not together." Ethan leaned closer. "Funny thing about women like her, they fall quietly, but they rise loudly. You'll hear it when it happens." Daniel's face darkened, but before he could respond, Chloe pulled him away with a soft whisper. "Ignore him. He's jealous." Eleanor clapped her hands sharply. "Music, everyone. Enough business talk. Tonight, we celebrate." The string quartet resumed. Laughter swelled again, but Daniel's eyes lingered on the flickering fire, something in him uneasy, like a ghost had brushed past. Camera pans to the mansion TV in the background, where the same lottery advertisement plays faintly again. The camera focuses on the numbers flashing on the screen. 0, 5, 12, 19, 23, 31, 45. Cut to Grace's tiny apartment. She pins those very numbers on the fridge, the same numbers her father once played every year. They toasted to victory, certain they'd buried her forever. But the universe had already chosen its winner, and her name was still Grace. The diner was nearly empty when Grace Morgan finished her late shift. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, flickering between red and gold. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, and her apron smelled faintly of burnt oil, but her heart was strangely calm. The night air was crisp, filled with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt. Grace tightened her coat and stepped out, her purse slung over one shoulder. For the first time in months, she didn't walk with her head down. She had just come from Mr. Whitmore's office earlier that day, and the news still echoed in her mind. $1.5 million. It wasn't in her hands yet, but it was real. It meant she could breathe again. Across the street, a billboard glowed. Saturday lottery jackpot. $200 million. One ticket could change everything. Grace paused under the glow, the wind tugging gently at her hair. She almost laughed. 200 million. Imagine that. Inside the convenience store below the sign, a line of customers formed near the counter. One old woman smiled as she walked out, clutching her ticket like it was made of gold. Grace hesitated, then stepped inside. As she reached the counter, her eyes fell on the rows of ticket slips. The cashier, a cheerful man with laugh lines, grinned. "Lucky night, huh? Everyone's trying their shot." Grace smiled softly. "I don't usually play." "Maybe you should," he said. "Jackpot like this doesn't come twice." She picked up a slip, but before marking anything, she froze. Her mind drifted back in time to her father's desk, old coffee stains on the wood, and him sitting there with a gentle smile. He'd hand her a pen every Saturday. "Same numbers, sweetheart. They remind me of you and your mother." She'd giggle, trying to read them. Why always the same ones, Daddy? He'd wink. Because luck isn't random, it remembers who deserves it. Grace whispered the numbers to herself. 0, 5, 12, 19, 23, 31, 45. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote them down. The moment felt strangely spiritual, like crossing paths with a memory too perfect to be coincidence. She handed the slip to the cashier. Just one ticket, she said. He grinned. People say that's all it takes. As he printed it, the sound of the machine seemed louder than usual, mechanical, rhythmic, final. Grace folded the ticket gently and slipped it into her Bible, the same one she kept beside her father's old letter. Keep it safe, the man called after her. Grace turned and smiled. Always. On her way home, the rain started again. She covered her head with her jacket and ran across the empty street. When she reached the apartment, Clara Brown, her landlady, stood by the stairs holding her mail. Busy night? Clara asked kindly. Always. Grace smiled faintly, catching her breath. You're glowing, girl. Did something good happen? Grace laughed softly. Maybe. Something about to. Upstairs, she tucked the children into bed. Ava mumbled sleepily. Mommy, are we rich yet? Grace brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Not yet, baby, but soon. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking clock. Grace sat on the couch, the lottery ticket resting on her Bible. She stared at it, the numbers glowing faintly under the lamplight. Her father's voice echoed again in her mind. Numbers aren't luck, Grace. They're memories. Her eyelids grew heavy. She placed the ticket carefully under the couch cushion for safekeeping and drifted into sleep. Thunder rumbled outside. A window rattled. The camera pans down a slow, tense zoom, revealing the edge of the ticket, slipping out from under the cushion, fluttering gently onto the floor. In the morning light, Jacob's small feet shuffle across the rug as he plays with his toy car. He accidentally kicks the ticket, and it slides out of sight under the couch leg. Grace, unaware, hums softly in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across her face. She didn't know it yet, but the slip of paper lying under her couch held not just numbers, but a doorway to destiny. A fortune that would rewrite every name that ever called her worthless. It had been almost a week since Grace Morgan bought that lottery ticket. Life was slowly finding rhythm again. The children laughed more. The room didn't feel as small anymore. Even the morning sunlight through the cracked window seemed warmer, almost forgiving. Grace sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, budgeting the little she had left. The sound of Ava and Jacob playing outside brought a faint smile to her face. For the first time in months, her heart didn't feel like it was drowning. Then, a knock at the door. It wasn't Clara's gentle knock. It was sharper, familiar. Grace froze, pen hovering midair. When she opened the door, the world she'd been rebuilding in silence shattered in one heartbeat. Standing there, in an expensive gray suit and that same smug confidence she once mistook for love, was Daniel Morgan. He looked her up and down, half smiling. You still keep this place clean, I see. Grace's hand tightened around the doorframe. What are you doing here? Relax, he said lightly, stepping inside without permission. I just wanted to check on you and the kids. Her voice went cold. You kicked us out, remember? Daniel gave a small laugh. Come on, Grace, don't make this dramatic. Things got messy, business stress, my mother's pressure. She cut him off. You mean Chloe's pressure? That name landed like a slap. His jaw tensed. Chloe has nothing to do with this. I came because I care about my children. Grace folded her arms. You cared enough to throw them into the street? For a moment, Daniel said nothing. His eyes darted around the wanted room, the second-hand furniture, the drawings on the wall, the chipped mug by the sink. He frowned, like the sight offended him. This is where you live now? He asked. Grace, this isn't you. She straightened. It is now. Daniel exhaled, stepping closer. Listen, my company's doing well again. Maybe I can help you. We could get you a decent apartment, a little money for the kids. You don't need to live like this. Grace's laugh was hollow. You think I'd take your pity after what you did? He smirked. You always had pride, I'll give you that. But pride doesn't pay bills. Her voice sharpened. Neither does betrayal. From the corner of the room, Ava appeared clutching her doll, confusion in her small voice. Daddy? Daniel's facade cracked for just a second. He crouched, forcing a smile. Hey, sweetheart. But Ava didn't move closer. Mommy said you're busy with your new family. Grace's heart twisted. Daniel rose, trying to recover his composure. Grace, stop poisoning their minds. She shot back, voice low and fierce. I don't need to. You did that yourself. He sighed, rubbing his temple like he was the victim. You're still impossible. Grace looked him dead in the eye. And you're still hollow. Daniel blinked, stunned. The woman before him wasn't the one he humiliated a year ago. She wasn't pleading anymore, she was anchored. He reached into his briefcase suddenly, pulling out papers. These are documents from our past accounts. There are things I need you to sign for closure. She glanced at them and pushed them back. No, you haven't even read. I said no. Daniel's jaw tightened. You'll regret this. Grace stepped closer, voice calm but dangerous. I already did once. Never again. He left without another word, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. Grace stood motionless, the echo of his footsteps fading. Then she sank slowly onto the couch, exhaling shakily. Ava ran to her, wrapping tiny arms around her waist. Mommy. He looked angry. Grace whispered, stroking her hair. Let him be angry. It means he's still afraid. Jacob peeked from the hallway. Afraid of what, Mommy? Grace smiled faintly. Of what he threw away. She reached down to pick up a crumpled paper Daniel had dropped near the couch. As she bent, her fingers brushed something beneath the sofa leg, dusty, thin, familiar. Her breath caught. She pulled it out slowly. The lottery ticket. It was creased, dirt-stained, but still readable. Her heart started pounding. She stared at the numbers, her father's numbers glowing faintly under the lamplight. He came to remind her of what she lost, but left her with what would soon change everything. Grace whispered to herself, voice trembling. Daddy, maybe this is it. The house was still when Grace Morgan found the ticket. She sat on the floor, heart hammering, staring at the faded slip in her trembling hands. It looked worthless, wrinkled, smudged, barely legible. But those numbers, those were his numbers. 05, 12, 19, 23, 31, 45. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Numbers aren't luck, Grace. They're memories. Ava tugged at her sleeve, blinking sleepily. Mommy, what's that? Grace forced a shaky smile. Maybe something special. Jacob yawned. Can it buy pancakes? She laughed through tears. Maybe a lot more than pancakes, sweetheart. She stood up abruptly, adrenaline surging. Get your coats. Where are we going? Ava asked. Grace's eyes glimmered with purpose. To see if your grandpa's memory still works miracles. Rain tapped on the windshield as Grace drove through the quiet streets toward the city. Her old car coughed with every turn, but her determination drowned out every sound. She clutched the ticket in one hand, whispering to herself like a prayer. Please, just once, let something go right. The neon sign of the Lottery Commission office glowed ahead, open 24 hours. Inside, the room was small, fluorescent, sterile. A tired clerk looked up from his monitor. Ma'am, the claiming counter's closed for big prizes, but if you'd like, I can check it for you. Grace hesitated, heart pounding. Please, just check it. He scanned the ticket lazily, glancing back at the monitor, then froze. His brows lifted. Ma'am. One moment. Grace's pulse spiked. What? Is something wrong? He didn't answer. He pressed a button on his desk. Another employee rushed over, whispering something quickly. Finally, the first clerk turned back, voice trembling. Ma'am, could I ask your name? Grace Morgan. He swallowed hard, hands shaking now. Mrs. Morgan. This ticket, it's the winning ticket. The words didn't land at first. Grace blinked, disoriented. I'm sorry, what did you say? He repeated slowly, his voice awed this time. You've won the $200 million jackpot. For a long, fragile moment, Grace just stared. Then she laughed, small at first, then uncontrollable, trembling, breathless. The clerk smiled nervously. Ma'am? Grace pressed a hand to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. Her knees nearly gave out. He did it, she whispered. My father, he did it. The staff surrounded her, cameras rolling, flashes bursting like fireworks. Linda Shaw, the lottery commissioner, stepped forward with a warm smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Morgan. You're now $200 million richer." Grace covered her face, laughing and crying at once. "No, not richer. Just free." Outside, she stood beneath the drizzle, clutching the official envelope containing her confirmation. The rain felt different now, cleansing, not cold. Ava looked up, eyes wide. "Mommy, did we really win?" Grace knelt, cupping her daughter's face. "Yes, baby. We really did." Jacob bounced beside her. "So we can buy pancakes?" Grace laughed through her tears. "We can buy every pancake." A small crowd formed outside the office, strangers cheering, reporters shouting questions. Grace shielded her kids and smiled softly. "I don't need to tell the world yet," she whispered. "Not until they see me walk into it." Hours later, the morning news flashed across every screen. $200 million jackpot winner identified local woman from Westwood claims prize. At the Morgan mansion, Eleanor sipped her tea until the headline caught her eye. Her cup froze midair. Daniel, across from her, glanced up pale, stunned. The photo on the screen was unmistakable. Grace, radiant, standing with her children, tears glistening on her cheeks. The reporter's voice echoed, "After years of hardship, single mother Grace Morgan's story of perseverance has captured hearts nationwide." Chloe's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered. Eleanor gasped. "That can't be." But Daniel was already on his feet, whispering in disbelief. "Grace?" Back at the small apartment, Grace stood by the window, watching dawn break the light gilding her face in gold. Her voice was calm, almost reverent. "Let them see what happens when the woman they threw away starts to rise. She didn't just win money, she won power. And the ones who broke her were about to learn what losing really feels like." Morning sunlight streamed through clean white curtains, a luxury Grace Morgan had almost forgotten existed. The modest apartment had been replaced by a quiet, elegantly furnished townhouse on the city's north end. Everything about it spoke of rebirth. Soft beige walls, polished oak floors, sunlight dancing off glass. But Grace's favorite view was still the simplest Ava and Jacob laughing over a stack of pancakes at the breakfast counter. The sound filled the air like healing. Jacob held up his fork proudly. "Mommy, we finally got pancakes every day." Grace smiled, brushing his curls. "Yes, baby, every single day, and never because someone let us." Ava giggled. "You're happy now, Mommy." Grace looked down at her children, her eyes glistening. "Yes, for the first time I really am." But happiness for Grace never lasted long before the past came knocking. A knock at the door, loud, deliberate. Clara, now hired as her housekeeper, peeked through the peephole. Her face darkened. "Grace, you might want to see this yourself." Grace frowned, walking toward the door. When she opened it, time seemed to fold back on itself. Standing there, in expensive suits and fake humility, were Daniel and Eleanor Morgan. Daniel smiled awkwardly, hands out as though they were old friends. "Grace, it's been a while." Eleanor forced a tremulous laugh. "We just wanted to see how you're doing. You've been in the news." Grace's face didn't move. "In the news?" Eleanor nodded, pretending warmth. "Such a surprise, a lottery winner. 200 million. You must be overwhelmed." Grace leaned against the doorframe, calm. "I'm managing." Daniel's eyes darted around the hallway, his voice dropping. "Grace, listen. We made mistakes. I made mistakes. But we were under so much pressure. I shouldn't have said those things. I shouldn't have." "You shouldn't have what?" Grace interrupted softly. "Thrown you out? Called you worthless?" He swallowed. "I was stupid, and I regret it every day." Grace tilted her head, watching him carefully. "Regret?" The way she said it made his chest tighten. Eleanor stepped in quickly. "We don't need to dwell on the past. What's important is family." Grace's lips curled into something between a smile and disbelief. "Family? You mean the one that locked the gates and watched me walk into the street with 2 children?" Eleanor flinched. "I was protecting my son, and I was protecting his name," Grace said evenly. "Funny how that name only matters when money's attached to it." Daniel's charm faltered. "Grace, we could work together again. You always had business sense. Maybe you could invest in the company? Bring it back stronger, for the kids' future?" Grace turned slowly toward him, her tone razor-sharp but polite. For the kids' future? You mean the kids you didn't ask about until I was worth $200 million? He stiffened. That's not fair. Grace smiled faintly. Neither was what you did. But we're even now. Daniel looked desperate. Grace, please. Let's fix this. She studied him for a long moment, then stepped closer, her voice low and calm. I used to beg you to listen when I was poor. Now you beg me to forgive you when I'm rich. But here's the thing, Daniel, I don't hold grudges. His face brightened slightly until she added, I just keep receipts. Before either of them could respond, a third voice echoed from the hallway. Well, isn't this cozy? Chloe Burns appeared perfect makeup, icy smile, pretending innocence. I thought we could all talk, Daniel insisted. Grace's calm eyes flicked between them. Of course he did. Birds of a feather. Chloe's smirk faltered. You think you're better than us now? Grace's voice didn't rise. No. Just freer, Daniel snapped. Chloe, stop. But Grace had already turned away. Clara, please show them out, Eleanor protested. Grace, wait. Grace glanced back one last time. You waited a year to see me. You can wait forever to understand me. The door closed gently, not slammed, but its final click sounded louder than thunder. Inside the silent house, Grace sat at her desk, pulling out a small golden envelope marked confidential. The same one from Mr. Whitmore. Her father's final letter, she whispered. Time to finish what he started. They came to reclaim her, not knowing she was already planning to rewrite everything they owned. 2 weeks later, Grace Morgan sat in a bright studio, her posture calm, her voice measured but her eyes burned with quiet purpose. Across from her sat Troy Wilson, a journalist known for asking the questions that made CEOs sweat. Cameras surrounded them, lights blazing. Troy leaned forward. Grace, the world knows you as the woman who was kicked out by her husband and then won $200 million. But you've never spoken publicly about it. Until today. Why now? Grace smiled faintly. Because sometimes silence protects peace, and sometimes silence protects the guilty. The crew froze. The control room leaned in. This wasn't going to be just another sympathy interview. Troy adjusted his mic. So, you're saying there's more to the story? Grace looked directly into the camera. Much more. I wasn't just thrown out, I was humiliated, insulted, and stripped of everything I had built beside him. But the mistake they made was believing I had nothing left. Troy hesitated. You're talking about your ex-husband, Daniel Morgan? Grace didn't blink. Yes, Daniel Morgan, and everyone who stood behind him while I begged in the rain with my children. The studio went dead quiet. Even the sound of the camera shutters slowed. Troy, careful but curious, asked, And how do you feel now that you've surpassed him? Grace's tone softened. I don't feel proud. I feel free. Money didn't save me, truth did. I just learned that sometimes truth costs $200 million to afford. The crew exchanged glances. This was more than an interview. It was a reckoning broadcast live. Eleanor, Daniel, and Chloe sat in the living room, the TV flickering. Eleanor's voice trembled. She wouldn't dare, Chloe scoffed. She's bluffing. She wants pity. But Daniel's face had gone pale. No, she's too calm. She's not bluffing. On screen, Troy continued. Grace, before we went live, you shared some documents with our team. Care to explain them to the audience? Grace nodded gracefully. Of course. Those are copies of financial records from a company I helped establish with my inheritance before marriage, Harper Solutions. When I married Daniel, he merged it with his business. What he never told investors was that 40% of his company's foundation came from my capital. Troy's eyes widened. You're saying he built his empire with your money? Grace smiled. Not saying, Mr. Wilson, proving. She gestured toward the screen behind them. The camera cut to images of documents, signatures, dated transfers, all labeled Harper Family Trust, Morgan Holdings. A murmur rippled through the studio. Back at the mansion, Chloe's glass shattered on the floor. Oh my God, Eleanor whispered. She's destroying us. Daniel clenched his fists, eyes locked on the screen. She's smarter than I thought. Troy turned back, astonished. So the woman they called worthless built the foundation of her husband's empire? Grace's voice was steady. That's the irony of betrayal. It always forgets who made the throne before it sat down. Social media exploded. The clip spread across every platform in minutes. Number. Grace Morgan's story. Number. Betrayal to billionaire. Number. Justice served. Troy concluded the interview, but Grace wasn't finished. One last thing, she said softly, eyes never leaving the camera. To every woman watching this who's been told she's nothing, remember, diamonds don't break under pressure. They're born from it. That night, Grace's words played on every news channel. Daniel's investors withdrew. Sponsors froze contracts. Eleanor's social circle turned cold. Chloe tried to call Daniel. He ignored her. When she tried again, his mother snapped, "We're finished. Because of you, because of her." At Grace's foundation headquarters, Hope Lives Here, named after that faded flyer, volunteers answered calls from women across the country, thanking her for giving them courage. Maya hugged her, whispering, "You didn't just win a jackpot, Grace. You changed the game." Grace smiled quietly. "No, I'm just returning everything they stole." As she left the office that evening, her phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. "You've said enough on camera. Now come to the gala this Saturday if you want to end this properly. DM." Grace stared at it for a long time, then slipped the phone into her purse. Her reflection in the glass door showed not fear, but focus. "Perfect," she murmured. "Let's end it where it began." They thought they could silence her story, but she was never speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for every woman who had ever been thrown away and learned how to rise. The world had barely caught its breath from Grace Morgan's viral interview before the next storm hit. By morning, headlines blared across every network. Daniel Morgan files lawsuit against ex-wife, claims rights to lottery fortune. From humiliation to courtroom showdown, the $200 million battle begins. Grace watched it all in silence from her office window, the city skyline stretching beyond her reflection. Maya stormed in, waving her phone. "He's suing you, Grace. He's actually suing you for your winnings." Grace's voice was calm, almost detached. "Of course he is. Men like Daniel don't lose, they just change the battlefield." Maya frowned. "But he can't." Grace cut her off gently. "He can try, and that's exactly what I want." Cameras flashed like lightning outside as reporters shouted questions. Grace stepped out of cum. A sleek black car wearing a beige suit, simple, elegant, unshakable. Her children watched from the car window as she walked up the courthouse steps. Across the plaza, Daniel Morgan and his attorney stood giving a statement to the press. "She used my last name to buy that ticket," Daniel said smoothly. "Technically, that makes it joint property. I only want what's rightfully mine." The crowd murmured, some sympathetic, most disgusted. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Judge Simmons, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, presided. "Mr. Morgan," she said firmly, "you're claiming the lottery winnings belong partly to you?" Daniel nodded confidently. "Yes, Your Honor. Grace and I were still legally married at the time of purchase. She used funds we once shared." Grace's attorney, Mr. Whitmore, rose slowly. The same man who had once handled her father's estate. "Your Honor," he said, "we will show evidence proving that every cent Grace used to purchase that ticket came from her independent earnings, none from her husband. Moreover, the Harper Trust, her father's estate, legally insulated all her assets, even during marriage." Daniel smirked. "Convenient story." Whitmore smiled. "Not a story, a legacy." Daniel's lawyer tried to corner Grace during questioning. "Mrs. Morgan, did you or did you not share finances with your husband before your separation?" Grace met his gaze. "Yes, until the day he closed every account in his name and left me with nothing." A ripple went through the courtroom. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Grace continued, her voice steady but her eyes fierce. "I didn't need his money then, and I don't need it now. My father left me something he could never buy: protection from greed." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Protection?" Whitmore stepped forward, handing her a document sealed with an embossed crest. "Your Honor, this is a clause from the Harper Trust, established in 1998. It states that any financial gain Grace achieves post-marriage, including inheritances, investments, or winnings, remains solely hers under federal and state law." Her father anticipated exploitation. Daniel's attorney blinked. That's That's impossible to enforce. Whitmore's calm deepened. Except it's already been tested in court. Twice. Both times. Upheld. The judge examined the paper, nodding slowly. I see no legal grounds for Mr. Morgan's claim. Daniel stood abruptly. This isn't over. She owes me everything I built. Grace rose, her voice soft but carrying through the room. You built nothing, Daniel. You borrowed. From me. From my love. From my silence. And this, she gestured to the courtroom, this is your receipt. He froze as the gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Simmons banged her gavel. Case dismissed. Mrs. Morgan retains full ownership of her winnings. As Daniel stormed out, reporters swarmed. Grace walked past him slowly, calm as sunlight. Grace, a journalist called. Any comment? She turned briefly, her voice serene. Yes. Never mistake kindness for weakness. They may look the same until tested. Outside, flashbulbs flared. Maya hugged her tightly. You did it! Grace exhaled deeply, finally smiling. No, Justice did. As she got into her car, a folded card waited on the seat, gold-edged, elegant. It read, Invitation, Carter Holdings Annual Gala, hosted by Daniel Morgan and Associates. Dress code, redemption or ruin. Grace's reflection shimmered in the glass window, calm but eyes ablaze. He tried to take her peace in court. Now she would take his pride in public. The chandeliers glimmered like constellations above the Carter Holdings Grand Ballroom, the same hall where, a year earlier, Daniel Morgan had laughed as he tore his wife's dignity to shreds. Tonight, the world's elite gathered again. Polished shoes, glittering gowns, glasses filled with champagne, and whispers sharper than diamonds. But this time, the whispers were different. This time, they were about her. That's Grace Morgan, right? The $200 million winner? She looks like she walked out of a movie. And she did. Grace stepped through the glass doors, radiant in a flowing white silk gown that shimmered under the chandelier light. Every head turned, every camera followed. Her calm smile carried no bitterness, just power wrapped in elegance. Beside her walked Mr. Whitmore, her father's old lawyer, and Maya, her friend and now personal advisor. The trio moved like quiet thunder, no fanfare, no announcement, just presence. Across the hall, Daniel froze mid-conversation. His champagne flute slipped slightly in his hand. Eleanor Morgan was the first to speak, her voice low and stunned. She came. Chloe Burns forced a laugh. So what? She's here for attention. But Daniel knew better. Grace didn't chase attention. She commanded it. Daniel composed himself and walked toward her, mask of charm intact. Grace, you look incredible. Grace turned slightly, meeting his eyes with calm precision. I usually do. You just never noticed. The crowd's hush deepened. Daniel chuckled nervously. You didn't have to come tonight. I did, she replied softly. To watch something end. He blinked. End? Before he could ask further, Troy Wilson, the journalist who'd interviewed her, appeared on stage as host. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, tonight we celebrate new beginnings, courage, and transformation. Our keynote speaker, a woman who reminds us that grace under fire can change everything, Mrs. Grace Morgan. The crowd erupted in applause. Daniel's face went pale. Grace walked up the stage slowly, her heels clicking like echoes of justice. She stood under the chandelier's golden light, facing the same world that once watched her break. Exactly 1 year ago, she began, her voice calm and steady. I was standing outside this very building, not as a guest, but as a woman discarded by the people she trusted most. Silence blanketed the room. I was told I was worthless, that I was a burden, that I had no value without someone else's name. Her gaze swept over the crowd, landing, briefly, on Daniel and Eleanor. But what they didn't know, she continued, is that a woman doesn't need to be kept to rise, she just needs to be released. Murmurs rippled. A few guests even nodded through tears. Grace smiled faintly. I didn't win $200 million by chance. I won it because I refused to stop believing that my story wasn't over. Every betrayal, every humiliation, every locked gate, all it did was sharpen my resolve. She paused, the audience hanging on her every word. So tonight I dedicate my foundation, Hope Lives Here, to every woman who's ever been told she's too small, too weak, or too broken to rebuild. We don't need permission to rise, we only need memory. Thunderous applause filled the hall. Even those who once gossiped about her stood in awe. As she stepped down, Daniel approached her once more, eyes wet, voice trembling. "Grace, please. I was wrong. I see it now. You were everything." She looked at him quietly, almost tenderly. "No, Daniel. I was something you just didn't know how to value it." He reached for her hand. "Can we start again?" Grace withdrew gently. "You had your chance. Tonight isn't about you. It's about every woman you underestimated." Then, with soft finality, she turned to walk away. Eleanor whispered in disbelief. "She's destroying us." Maya smiled behind Grace. "No, she's freeing herself." As Grace exited the hall, flashbulbs exploded around her, lighting her path like victory fireworks. She paused at the door, looking back one last time, the same chandelier glowing above the people who once watched her fall. Her voice was calm, barely audible. Full circle. In the room where her tears once fell, she left behind only light. But her story wasn't over yet, because true victory isn't measured in applause, it's measured in what you leave behind.